Hey everybody, Bobby here. Welcome to Chew on This, where I talk about art, life as an artist, and here's something to chew on. If I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't be nearly as successful. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, when I was a student and I was getting out of college, I couldn't get a job. I've talked about this a bunch of times, but that is why I started my studio, Imaginism Studios, many years ago, well over 10 years ago. Now, something that you might not know is when I asked one of my teachers, should I start my own studio? I'm thinking about starting my own studio. He said, no. Go and work for another studio first for about 10 years, get some experience, and then start your own studio. Well, I didn't follow that advice. I didn't think that it'd be that hard. But if I knew every month there are over 500,000 new businesses that are started, and approximately 70% of these businesses will fail within the first 10 years. 50% of them will fail within the first 5 years. If I knew those facts, I probably would have thought twice about starting my own business, knowing the risks that I know now. But because I didn't know those things, I went into starting my own business pretty confidently, probably too confidently. Now, I'm not giving you advice saying that, hey, just go in blind and things like that, but I want you to think about these things because those are things that I think about. And I don't really have much of an answer for you, but I do have lots of stories and lots of things to hopefully create some thought-provoking discussion in the comments. If I knew the failure rate of starting my own business, I'm sure things would have changed. Now, that's one example of how being kind of ignorant, not knowing all the facts, really helped me. Here's another. I made a video about this, talking about the condition aphantasia. Aphantasia is the inability to visualize images in my mind's eye. That's something that I dealt with going into school. That could be difficult for some people, especially me, because I'm taking art in school. And the ability to visualize in the mind's eye can really help. Recently, I was in Korea visiting Kim Jong-gi's museum, where he does all these incredible drawings, and you really get the sense of how much he can visualize. Well, I actually knew Kim Jong-gi and was able to ask him before, when you draw something, before you draw something, how much can you visualize? And he said, if he had a letter-sized piece of paper, he could visualize over 90% of what he's going to draw before he even draws it. How much could I visualize back in school when I first got into animation and I was just learning the ropes? I would say 0. If somebody asked me to visualize sitting on a beach and seeing a turtle come onto the shore, what I would imagine isn't anything visual. It's more like a checklist. I would think, okay, I'm sitting on a beach. I have probably a reclining chair. I have an umbrella. And these are kind of like just a checklist of things that I should have in my image. But can I see that image? No, I couldn't see the image. All I saw was static. If I closed my eyes, I tried to visualize as much as I can. All I saw was static. Good thing for me, there was no such thing as aphantasia when I was in school, because the whole entire term was coined in 2014, I believe. So I just thought that it was part of the process of being an artist. Everybody starts off with not being able to visualize anything. My teacher is telling me, visualize. First you start visualizing a box, then you start to visualize more complex things and more complex until you're able to even rotate things in your head. Well, I couldn't see anything when I closed my eyes, but because I was ignorant, I thought that this is what happens to everybody. So I remember sitting at my desk, staring at a blank piece of paper for literally hours, trying to visualize a box. I did this for days, weeks. I would think about 2 weeks, if I am not mistaken, before I could see finally one day a fuzzy box. and then it disappeared. And then I had to keep visualizing and try to visualize and keep practicing and practicing until I could see that box again. And then it disappeared, but it came back a little sooner, and then more and more frequent until I was able to visualize much more regularly. From there, I would start to visualize more complex things like a skull, a pelvis. I would start to visualize in color, in motion. That's when I realized that the brain is kind of like a muscle. You can exercise different kinds of thinking and improve on them. But that's something we already kind of know intuitively, don't we? We all have examples of trying to think in a certain way and then getting better and better at it with more and more practice. Sometimes I imagine what would happen if my instructor knew what aphantasia was and told us all, hey, if you can't visualize anything, if you just see static, you got aphantasia. You are diagnosed and there is no cure. There is no way to improve it. I'm sure I probably wouldn't have even tried. It makes me think some information is great to have and some information perhaps we can do without, because many times it's the lack of information, the lack of knowing certain dangers or certain difficulties that helps us to keep going. And because we kept going, that's why we succeeded. Don't you think that's kind of interesting? I constantly think about that, like how some of the smartest people don't really try because they know how difficult things are. And because of that, they don't even take the first step. Some people, right? Definitely not all. Here's something else that I think about, I believe in, and it probably isn't even true. I believe that when somebody is putting in effort, doing their time, and trying to think with logic, and then bad things still happen to them, it just means that great things are around the corner as long as you keep a positive attitude, right? So if something unfortunate happens to me and I've been really, really trying, putting in that effort, putting in that time, and trying to think logically, I think as long as I put on a smile and proceed in a positive way, it just means that great things are around the corner. And if something else that's horrible happens, it just means that, wow, that thing around the corner is going to be absolutely amazing. Now, does that make sense? I feel like it makes sense in a way, because if I proceed with a positive attitude, I would make different decisions than if I proceeded with a negative attitude. That's my logic with that kind of thinking, but does it mean that there are great things around that corner? Probably not. Who knows? I choose to believe that. And because I choose to believe that, almost always, I kind of feel like always, it becomes true. Perhaps that's just my ignorance again. But does it really matter? I feel like it doesn't, because the whole entire point is that I want to give it my all. I can't really give it my all without going forward with a positive attitude, because then I can really maximize my effort, my time, my logic, and keep proceeding in a positive way. I don't really care if it's true or not. I would rather remain ignorant to the fact that it might not be true, because it allows me to live my life in the way that I want. I don't want to be moping around all the time, feeling bad for myself when things aren't going my way. I would rather think, oh, things aren't going my way. This is exciting. I wonder what's around that corner. Now, if you like this kind of thinking, there's a lot of talk about AI around the corner, and that's something that could really, really make us nervous. So check out this video about ChatGPT and how it can make AI images now of Ghibli-style art. How frightening is that? But I put a twist on it with my own kind of thinking so I can proceed in a positive way. I hope you like this video, and I'll catch you all next time.